Thank you all for coming. LGBT plus law and policy at Maine Law is very proud and humble today to welcome as a speaker Dale McCormick. To give you some background on Dale, she was born in New York City. She graduated from the University of Iowa in 1971. Following completion of her undergraduate degree, she entered an apprenticeship program in carpentry and was the first woman in the country to finish an apprenticeship program for carpentry, becoming a journeywoman in 1975. As part of that process, she also filed a successful complaint with the Iowa Human Rights Commission for sexual harassment in the workplace, which, given the temper at the time, was somewhat unique. After completion in 1975, she also founded her own environmentally conscious carpentry firm that was geared towards solar and energy efficient building. She's an accomplished technical author. Her two most noted works are Against the Grain and House Mending, Home Repairs for the Rest of Us. I apologize, it's not very well skewed. She moved to Maine first in 1980 to teach courses on energy efficient construction. She founded in 1988 Women Unlimited, or Women Unlimited, which trains women in Maine in non-traditional work skills. In 1984, following the murder of Charlie Howard, she entered politics in the state of Maine. She was the first delegate to a national nominating convention who was out from the state of Maine in 84 to San Francisco for the Democrats, and again in 88 to the Democratic National Convention in Atlanta. She founded or co-founded the Maine Lesbian Gay Political Alliance, which was one of the precursor organizations to Equality Maine. She participated in the Tolerance Day lawsuit that directly related to the Charlie Howard murder. She will be speaking about that later. She also co-founded the Derigo Alliance, a network of gays, lesbians, workers' unions, and others dedicated to an environmentally conscious state. She ran for state senate in 1990, becoming the first openly lesbian candidate in the state. She won and became not only the first lesbian member of the state legislature, but the first openly gay member of the state legislature. She was reelected in both 1992 and 1994. Her main highlight at the time, according to her Wikipedia article, was writing the Family Security Act, which I hope she can talk to if she has time.
It's still a brilliant idea.
There you go. She was elected state treasurer of Maine in 1996. She was both the first female state officer, there have now been subsequent, including Governor-elect Jen Mills, and I believe the first, if not the only, LGBT state officer in history. She served 4 terms as state treasurer. Another highlight there was helping to found the Investor Network on Climate Risk. As part of that, in 2005, she spoke at the UN as a co-convener of the first Investor Summit on Climate Risk. She was appointed subsequently Executive Director of State Housing in Maine. In 2013, she was elected and served 1 term to the Augusta City Council, serving through 2016. LGBT, again, is humbled and proud that she's come to speak to us today. I hope you can all welcome her with me. Thank you so much.
That was a great introduction. You always remember things about your life when somebody gives a very complete introduction like that. So, it's great to be here. Thank you for asking me. I thought I've been doing a little thinking about this, and I thought I would touch on the parts of my life that intersected the law, since you all are going to be lawyers. And you already mentioned it. The first thing, well, first of all, let me just, by way another introduction, is I am a lesbian, and that has really been a huge part of my culture and my identity. And I since I am not your age, I don't know if that still is true, but back when I grew up, which was in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and the 70s were still the 60s. You should know. That aloneness and being different, I think, heightened the cultural, the need for creating our own communities, which there's been articles written now that is waning. Very, very fascinating. And so anyway, it's a big part of, it remains a huge part of my identity. So when I entered the apprenticeship program, I didn't get sexual harassment until I knew a little something, which right away is fascinating. If I weren't so embroiled in it, I would have been fascinated by it then. But, so in my third year, I began to get, in the winter in Iowa, which is where I was, we were building a post office, and there'd be a little warm-up shack for where we would eat our lunch because it was cold and snow. And all the carpenters and laborers would put their lunch boxes and hats and coats here, and the plumbers had their own, and the electricians had their own because they didn't want to mess with us because they were higher and we got the money. And so I began getting pornographic objects either in my lunchbox when I would open it, or pin-ups on the underneath my coat, where on the peg I would have my coat. And I would go and take one and tell it to the supervisor of the job, and who was in a little trailer outside of the building that we were building, the shell of the building. And this went on for a couple of months. And then graffiti in the bathroom, of course, the porta potty. And so one day, one Friday, I came back to find yet another, you probably don't even know what these are, but back in the day there were erasers for typewriters with round circles and a little brush that you brush away the ink that you just erased from your typewriter. And it looked like pubic hair. It would always curl and look like pubic hair. So somebody had put one of those in my lunchbox, and another pinup. And I just lost it, basically, I will admit. And so I'm starting out with a funny story. This is a fun, you can laugh at this. So I had my carpenter's belt on, and I took out my hammer. And I walked around, I'm going to use you. I walked around and I came to, there were three brothers, and they were stocky like you, they were built. And I came upon one of them, and so I went like this. Are you the one that's been putting those lunches in my lunchbox? Are you the, I got my hammer like this, except he was like this. And he said, no. So I kept going, and I went to the superintendent, and his first words were, "Oh, did you get another dirty picture?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, they're just trying to get you." I said, "I know, they are." And he said everything that you would think he would say. He said, "Boys will be boys." And so he wasn't going to help. I kept saying, "Well, what are you going to do about it? This has got to stop." So he said. So I left there, still had my hammer out, marched, like this. I was, if this was completely out of control, furious, I was like not very far down. And I marched into the warm-up shack, and there was a whole bench with everybody's lunchbox on this, and so I stood there and said they were in, this was after work, so they were in all the carpenters and laborers were there. I'm sure it had spread like wildfire, or that McCormick was on a tear, And so I stood there and I said, "Okay, who has been doing this?" I said, "Okay, this," and nobody, no. And I took my hammer and I said, "Well, this shit's got to stop." And I went like this, down through one lunchbox, and this is the days of glass vacuum sealed thermoses, and then it was this, because I hit the thermos. And that was sort of the last, that was expended all my all my energy, because Rayner, who is the brother of this guy, who I already confronted, he came up and said, "You better get me a new lunchbox by Friday, by Monday," like that. So on the way home, that same day, we get off at 5:30, and that didn't take all that long, and so there was time to go to the city hall in Iowa City. And there was only a secretary in the I knew there was a human resource or human rights commission. And I said to her, well, I said, I have the job and everything. I have the job, but they're putting dirty pictures up in my objects. And she said, they can't do that. Sign this and sign this and sign this. And she had me file with the local Human Rights Commission, with the state of Iowa Human Rights Commission, and with the EEOC. And of all of those, what came through first was the local Human Rights Commission, because there were 5 years backed up with. So the outcome was that they met and they interviewed me and they interviewed Rayner and his brother Maynard, and they found probable cause that I was being sexually harassed. And what I got out of I didn't get any money out of this. I asked them to put up some posters, but what I got out of this was the bubble of safety, of the protection of the law. Really, the image I have of me after that day was surrounded by a bubble, transparent, that let me walk around, and Maynard and Rayner knew that bubble was there, and they got furious. And the whole power balance changed to where I was protected by this bubble, and they were pissed because they said, I wish the state would pay for my lawyer. And I just pull my heart right down and I say, yeah, it's too bad, huh? And I finished my apprenticeship. I had a whole year to go because I filed that suit, and because it had, the power of the state and fairness came to bear on my side. And so I always tell young tradeswomen that women fought and died for these laws, and you guys, I want to tell too, they're important, and I hope you can save some other young carpenter sometime. And also interesting, might be to you, is that this company, Knudsen, out of Minnesota, where's Minnesota? Yes. Oh, yes. Okay. Have you heard of Knudsen? Big company. They had a human rights officer, Pedro Ramos. I remember his name. And this went on for months. He should have been down there. He should have been intervening, and then they had a suit, and they had to go to court, and they had to admit things. And so the law only goes so far, I guess. So anyway, then after that, in Iowa, I helped form in the 60s, late 60s, it was the second wave of the women's movement. The first wave being the vote in 1919, 15, 19, 20. And then women sort of woke up after being asleep, and we formed the Women's Liberation Front. This was a very radical time. This was the 60s, but you can tell by these names. The Women's Liberation Front, the Gay Liberation Front, which I also helped start. And then when I moved to Maine in 1980, we pretty quickly, 1984, formed MLGPA, Maine Lesbian Gay Political Alliance, which it still slips out of my mouth. And we did this working on the civil rights bill, and I'm sure it hasn't escaped your notice that gay people, LGBTQ plus people are well, maybe not the only, but the first and maybe the only minority group that has had to win their rights at the ballot box. So we have become expert campaign workers, which is a whole nother, we could talk about that, but a whole nother integration of gay people with political policymakers, because we know how to win the elections, to get good progressive people thinking about healthcare and civil rights in power. So we became attractive suddenly. This was way before Ellen came out and Will and Grace and Queer Eye, way before that. So there was not that attractiveness of this civil rights struggle that we were having. And in fact, in 1985, AIDS came to Maine, and that made everything much harder. I was the president of MLGPA at that point, and I can remember sitting in Yarmouth, where Professor Riggins lived too, and just crying basically about how do you get civil rights or lead an organization when everywhere everybody was fearful about AIDS and HIV, and it was so misunderstood, including by Larry Lockman, who is still a member of the Maine Legislature, and back then was published pamphlets. Who was I telling you about the pamphlets that just vile anti-gay pamphlets? They would write these things, and he had one with a drawing of a mosquito on it, and he said, if you could, doctors say AIDS is carried by mosquitoes. Well, of course, that made everybody very afraid. So we still have those people with us, and Larry Lockman is still doing his evil prejudice. He's now moved on to immigrants. So then, right around 1984, I was Tolerance Day, and I wanted to touch on that. Did you help with the brief at all with Tolerance Day? I know you advised me somehow.
Yeah. I helped you get lawyers.
That's right. I needed a lawyer. But I knew Jenny always has had my back. And so what happened was that because Charlie Howard had been thrown into a river and drowned solely because he was gay the year before, David Solmitz of Madison High School, who is a very progressive guy, said, I'm going to have a Tolerance Day, and I'm going to invite all these different kinds of people. And he invited a Catholic and a black person and a Jehovah's Witness and a veteran and a lesbian, which was me. And the lesbian is what put them a little over the bend, or around the bend in Madison. And they canceled Tolerance Day, and unfortunately, as Jenny will know, they had a better lawyer than we did. Their lawyer was Mert Henry, and he knew there was only one way that he could get around this being a prejudicial stopping, and that's to say it was from the safety and security of the school is why they canceled it, and that held up in court. And we lost. We got a temporary, did we get a temporary? We went for a temporary restraining order, and I don't think we won that. So we lost the case, but this is very instructive. We lost the battle, but we won the war on Tolerance Day because it leaked out that this high school in Maine was having this Tolerance Day so everybody could sing Kumbaya and understand each other, and they canceled it because a lesbian was going to speak. And so it was in the Wall Street Journal and and on TV, and everybody went, "Did you hear about that up in Maine? They canceled Tolerance Day because they were so intolerant." And that was a win for us. That was a very big deal back then. So then we proceeded to lobby for the Civil Rights Bill for 20 years, probably Patrick, who clearly knows everything about this whole time period from your research, but I think from early 70s until we passed the Civil Rights Bill in 2004, I think it was 2004, we lobbied legislators with food. We had coffees, and we had breakfast, and we'd have a teacher, a psychologist, a gay person, which took a lot of courage back then to come out to legislators. We tried to have that kind of group to come and talk about this with, and there would be, there would be 5 to 10 to 15 people come, because they like to come in the morning for muffins, and we got the reputation of having pretty good food, because parents in PFLAG, parents and families of lesbians and gays would make the food. Oh, we also had a parent, always would have a parent. Very good. Huge, important bridge group for people understanding us. And we did this every year, we tried, Larry Connolly suggested one year I compromise the bill and take away, the bill is to prevent, the bill was to outlaw discrimination based on sexual orientation in housing, employment, public accommodations, and credit. And he said, why don't you take away the public accommodations and credit? And this was a tough decision, but it's probably one of my first lessons in compromise, which is if it's a good compromise if it moves you forward and you haven't compromised your core values. And when we did that, we got a couple more. I think we might have gotten the Catholic Church on that one, because it was very important. Maine, heavily Catholic in the north. And when we got the Catholic Church, I remember Dick Harrison from Northern Lambda North saying to me, it doesn't matter to me that whether we win or lose this bill, the fact that the Catholic Church has come out in support against discrimination is the biggest thing that's happened to us in a long time. It was a real lesson in politics. And just like the Tolerance Day, you do something and it has little offshoot victories and moves you ahead in ways that you haven't intended. So we also had an Adopt a Legislator program. That was my idea. I thought it was brilliant. So we asked people all over to adopt. We'd say, we don't want you to do anything really scary. Come out like coming out to your parents. Just come out to your legislator. And so people did that, and legislators. We did this because legislators would actually say, I don't have any gay people in my district. But that was how invisible we were at that point. Then we did so pretty much the job then of the president of MLGPA was to be the lobbyist or the presence at the State House, and we had to deal with AIDS and HIV, and we had at that point, and this is another political lesson, a woman named Dr. Lonnie Graham was the head of the Bureau of Health, and she was a straight, and still is, a straight ally. And she, if it wasn't for her and my trust in her and our trust in her, we would not have gotten through the HIV, we're still in it, but the crisis like we did, because she would come to me and she'd say, the funeral directors want toe tags. You know, they want to know which body has HIV and what doesn't. Anybody who's dealing with blood wanted to have a toe tag or a badge. And then there was the issue of non-compliant carrier. These were big legal issues at the time. Someone who knows they have HIV or HIV positive, but and this is also laced with prejudice because you know they showed the gay people as predators. You know, like, oh, I know I have this stuff in me, so I just am going to have sex with as many people as I can, which is, you know, I don't think ever was proven to be true. But that was an issue we had to do. So working with Lonnie Graham, she said, if you don't work with me to create this policy, they are going to create one, and we are not going to like it. We and her, and she, whichever one, I don't know. So that was really important to have, and there were these people around, these straight allies or people who bridged us to other communities. And then we did the hate crimes bill. Da, 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 da. And who here wrote the hate crimes bill? Oh, it's Professor Riggins wrote the book. She did all this research, and I'm telling my version of this. You can tell the real version, but she borrowed from this and this, and the part I remember, the most important part that she not borrowed but took from the ideas in other states was in Massachusetts. I remember you telling me this, that where the Attorney General could sue on behalf of LGBTQ people who were being the victim of a hate crime, and so she stuck that in the bill, and that turned out to be the most important part of the bill, because people up in Aroostook County who were being harassed by their neighbors and they were 20 miles from anything, were not going to stick up for themselves. And so what turned out, as I recall, is that who really used the hate crimes bill was the Attorney General's office. And so let's have a round of applause. And we may manage to pass this because, on the one hand, we had the Civil Rights Bill, the bill that had been lurking around for 15 years, and over here we had hate crimes bill. And by that time we built up enough political collateral so that they wanted to do something. So they passed the hate crimes bill and not the Civil Rights Bill. But that was really our first legislative victory, I think. And then somewhere around in there, I decided to run for the Senate. And here I want to give a little, leave you with this, no, it's not the end yet, don't worry. But, so Shirley Chisholm, do you know Shirley Chisholm? She was a congresswoman from Brooklyn, African-American, first woman to be nominated by any party to, I think, vice president. And she came to Maine. We brought her, she was a firebrand. She was 65, white hair, short, about like this. And she came to a conference we did in Lewiston at their theater at Bates. And the conference was to encourage women to run for office. So I have to do a little thing. So she stood up she's up there and you're down here. She stood up on the stage with her glasses like this and her white hair and 5 feet tall. And she looked at everybody, 350 women, and there was SRO of this thing. She said, women have to put aside their petty reluctances and run for office. That's a direct quote. I remember it to this day. And it must have just imprinted itself on my heart, because then in 1990 when, or maybe it was 88, this is not, you can look this up, when the Casey decision came down from the Supreme Court, which basically lobbed the whole issue of reproductive choice to the legislators. Just told them that they could make policy. I decided that my internalized homophobia was a petty reluctance. And because I did have it. I absolutely have a great dose of internalized homophobia. And so I had this 10-year incumbent right-wing point man for the Christian Civic League, incumbent senator, state senator for Monmouth, Maine, where I was living, and I decided to run against him. And I had a primary, so because of course, you know, you can't be a lesbian can't get elected. Maybe in Portland, because Barb Wood, that's the one thing was that Barb Wood was the first elected openly gay person, city council in Portland. So I won the primary, and then we had this Swiss Watch campaign, just brilliant campaign. Volunteers, people from Portland would come and go door to door, and it was so well organized that my only job was to go door to door, just me. Because we figured out that I was, the more people I could meet, the less they could scare people about me. You know, because I'm really not very scared. You may have noticed that. And, except when I have a hammer. It's not so scary. So I went door to door. And there was this volunteer effort. There were these mailing parties to, well, you know, that's a whole, I could talk a lot about how we won. We won this race by 0.5% of the vote. And it was a squeak, you know, landslide McCormick. It was a squeaker. and they Norm Weymouth and his brother, oh, I have to tell you this story. It's a good story. So Norm Weymouth had a brother. What was his name? Well, Weymouth. And his brother, they would for weeks in the letters to the editor, it was, you know, Sodom and Gomorrah this and Leviticus that, and you know, just they gay baited me the whole time, and we just would stick to the high road of healthcare, property taxes. Notice we're still working on healthcare. So finally, Chester, his brother Chester, wrote in a letter to the editor, and this is like, you know, 3 weeks or a month before the election. And he said, because they were getting frustrated. You could just, you could see that they were just, you know, she's a lesbian, what are you talking about? Why aren't we ahead? I mean, you could just say, come on. They're just mad. And so he writes in and he says, she doesn't stand for anybody's family values. She hasn't endured the pain and agony of childbirth. He did. And so every woman in the district wrote back in and said, and he hasn't endured the pain and agony of childbirth. And she represents my family values and my family values. So that's the way it went. And then we won, and it was a great win. And you could just see them going like this, drat. So then I'll just finish up, because I want to leave time for this barely at any time. Marriage. So then we finally passed the Civil Rights Bill, and a Lewiston politician, majority leader of the House, said to me one day, he said, this bill, you're not going to win this time. This is back in 70 or mid-80s or 90s. He said, this is the kind of bill that hangs around for 20 years, and then all of a sudden it passes. And that's exactly what happened. And so we went from, along the way, once John Martin, the Speaker of the House, had to clear the House gallery of grade school kids because of the language that was being used about gay people by members of the legislature in the House. Barnyard language, he called it. We went from that to, in 2004, a 6-hour debate. 6 hours, because every single one of them wanted to be on the record supporting this. I'm getting verklempt just thinking about that moment. It was incredible. And so then we started working on marriage, and that gets into your time frame. But what I found fascinating, we had two, well, we had really three referendums. One was a negative one, which left us. They wanted to ban it, or put it in the Constitution or something, and so a no vote meant the status quo. But then the next time, we had one for marriage, I think, and that lost. But the campaign was on equality and fairness. You know, it's not fair. They can, why can't, you know, fairness and equality. The 2012 campaign was built on that. So we got more people with the fairness idea. The next one was not that kind of fairness, it was feelings. It was fascinating to me. Because I said, I don't need to be trained to talk on the phone. I went through the last campaign, you know, wrong. It wasn't about that. It was about letting a person talk about how their grandmother Sadie would roll over in her grave if this ever, it was feelings. It was, and that is what put us over. And then we won marriage in 2012, marriage equality. And I think that's enough talking on my part. So we could have spent a whole day talking about all this stuff, but it just gives you a little flavor. And now I can't wait to hear any comments or questions you all have.
So I read some of the legislative history around the time of the Civil Rights Act, and I, just reading the language of people were saying on the record about people who were gay and all of everything, I'm sure you remember very vividly, was so outrageous to me. And I wonder how you deal with trying to talk to that person then, try to work with them, because you still need to work with them every year to pass it, because it still took 20 years. So my question is, like, how do you work with somebody's prejudices and try to keep moving them along while they're saying things that are just publicly outrageous?
It's very hard. But those people, like I remember the guy who I think was the focus of John Martin's ire when he cleared the House, was a guy called Tubby Laffin. And he was just out there, you know, like I didn't ever want their need to work with Tubby Laffin. Yeah. He was not going to go there. But there were, you know, it's a bell curve. There were ardent supporters and complete prejudiced guys like Tubby Laffin, and then there was the middle. And it was, you know, it's the middle. It's like any campaign is really for the middle 10%. It's not about you and I.
Yeah.
It's, but it's very hard. The answer is it's very hard. And it's very, unlike healthcare, which can be personal if you have a pre-existing condition, which is what got me into being a healthcare reformer. It's even more personal than that. It's not your issue that's out here if you're gay or the LGBTQ person. It's very hard to keep it separate. And there is a sheet that my friend Betsy Sweet is written on one page on how to lobby, a citizen lobbyist. And one of the first things is don't ever burn a bridge. And some other, you just have to swallow it. Now, I could tell a story on myself, which is that just last year, I was lobbying my House member who's a neighbor a half a block away, Matt Puglia, who is now going to grace us in the Senate. And he, and I lost him. So don't send me to lobby Matt Puglia. I was indignant based on the fact that I had been in the Senate. I said, Matt, will you vote for expanding Medicaid? And he said, will you vote for me for Senate? That was his first thing, quid pro quo. And I pretty much lost it. It went downhill from there. I said, Matt, I have, in all my time in the legislature, I never once said that to anyone, you know. It's just not kosher. Anyway. So, I mean, the F word was said, that's the conversation. It was, I broke every rule that there was.
What do you see as the future for the issue of bathrooms for transgender students in high school? How do you see that playing out? What avenue do you see it taking? What levers are people going to be?
What lever?
What leverage are people going to be using? What pinch points are there?
The issue is transgender bathrooms or genderless bathrooms. Well, we certainly lost a huge ally when President Obama ended his presidency. That man, he did more for LGBTQ people than any other president, elected leader ever. I mean, all the way from Mary Bonanno could lay it out for us. You could maybe lay it out for us too. From immigration law to the advice he gave to schools. I think it's based on prejudice. I think it's the same arc that we had to do for the Civil Rights Bill, a misunderstanding of, there's huge misunderstanding and prejudice against transgender people, and the fact that transgender people, especially trans women, are getting murdered at a rate that's very high and unacceptable, just shows me that that's where we are, and we have to have, what's her first name? Maines, you know, who wrote the book? Nicole, thank you. Nicole Maines being a Supergirl on the Supergirl, a trans superhero, which I have to remember to watch that. That kind of, you know, it's gonna, every little thing's gonna help. Because my theory of moving ahead on things is that we only move ahead as far as we have organized to go. So for instance, Patrick mentioned the Family Security Act. Charlene Rydell and I got criticized for that because it was a compromise between managed care and a single payer system. But that's what we thought would pass, all that would pass. And what we got was people saying, you're not being, you have all this power, you're not being a good leader, you need to pass this. You know, you need to be out there. And my perspective is, like, you can look at battles at the legislature on workers' comp, on just the other day people were saying, we're being critical because there's gridlock in Washington. Maybe, but there's not been a decision in the society yet on those things. When you see gridlock on workers' comp balled up this state for a long time, And there was not an agreement in the population on how to handle that. That's why there wasn't agreement in the legislature. So we basically have some education work to do on trans, I think. And I'm looking over at them too much. I'm really sorry. Now I'm going to ignore them. I'm kidding. Does anybody else have a thought? Well, you're on the wrong side. Okay. No. Okay, somebody over here is thinking of something.
You mentioned one of the political lessons you learned was about how to compromise. I was just wondering if you could expound a little more on what are the things you thought about when you were trying to figure out, does this move the ball forward, or am I just kind of compromising my morals?
That's a great question. So, in the case of, I had to compromise two big times. One was on when I wasn't in the legislature, that I described about removing public accommodation and credit from the bill, and that one was easier because it was because I knew that if it passed that way, it would be a huge step forward, and we could add the others, which was Representative Connolly's point. So I could tell that that was a good compromise. Other one, you guys are going to hate me. See, I still worry. And the hard part is the voice in your head about what everybody's going to say. All the people you represent, all the hundreds of lesbian and gay people that I was representing at the legislature. That's weighty and hard. Was when I was in the Senate and Senator Georgette Barabee from Lewiston was going to introduce an anti-marriage act, a constitutional amendment, and you might recall that there were states that were doing this, and we had not had one, and once you get something like that, you have to have 2/3 vote to get it back, and so we really didn't want that, and so I made a deal. I was one of the co-sponsors of the Civil Rights Bill, and I said, we won't introduce the Civil Rights Bill this year and we had introduced it every year for 20 years, if you will not introduce the anti-marriage equality. And she didn't, and we didn't, but it was very hard. Now, what kind of compromise is that? We didn't get anything forward. I certainly didn't move the ball forward, but I did manage to not avoid a huge hurdle. That was hard. And another story. I was sitting with Tim McFeely, who used to be the president of the Human Rights Campaign Fund. It had an F on the end of it back then. And we were at the NGLTF, National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, Creating Change Conference. And it was right during, remember when President Clinton was first elected, he right away proposed a don't ask, don't tell in the military. He proposed doing away with that. I think back then it was gay people couldn't be gay people, sorry. Gay people could not be in the military, and this fight was what Don't Ask, Don't Tell came out of. So Barney Frank was, I also had talked to Barney Frank at this point. He was the Massachusetts congressperson, openly gay in the legislature, and he said he was tearing his hair, saying, what was President Clinton thinking? We're not ready for that, and we weren't ready for that. The same when Lewiston introduced a civil rights bill in their city council. What were they thinking? It was always going to lose, and meanwhile we're wanting to go one step, So Barney Frank described the don't ask, don't tell compromise, which he helped to forge, and all the shit he was getting from the gay community for this. And Tim McFeely, we were sitting having coffee, said, you know, our community has to understand the structure of compromise, what a good compromise is, and does it move us forward, and have you compromised away your core values? And in his opinion, and in my opinion, that don't ask, don't tell it did move us forward, but it was a hard pill for gay people to swallow.
I think we have time for just one more question.
It has to be from this side. You the quiet side. Well, you don't have to.
We're just soaking it all in.
You're soaking it all in. Okay. It doesn't have all good. You saved them.
So there is this kind of biggish view of history, I think, that comes out of...
Maybe?
Yeah, in terms of this kind of liberal progress, compromises that they've done before in terms of certain victories, for example, marriage equality being a campaign which poured millions of dollars into the state, right? And each of these victories does seem to cast somewhat of a shadow over other issues that could be fought through coalitional politics.
Through what?
Coalitional politics. Homeless teenagers, for example, or just employment issues. And I'm wondering, now in 2018, you've seen decades of different political battles take place. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for what the future might look like in terms of kind of battles between communities and kind of visibility of communities and being able to fight battles. I think you suggested at one point that you don't see perhaps as well-formed a community or maybe as well-formed a platform as there used to be in decades past. And I'm wondering if maybe you could expand on that a bit.
I wouldn't, I don't
Really
think...
quickly. It's a class meeting here in 5 minutes.
Okay. No, I think we have lost our gay and lesbian spaces. You know, the gathering places have been replaced by either understanding and lack of prejudice, which allows us into more other places. That's what I meant. But just briefly, because that was a huge question. But when we first started MLGPA, I joined the Women's Legislative Agenda Coalition, WELAC, and this was on the advice of the other straight ally women of the AAUW, and now saying, you're not going to get to work on your issue. You'll never get them to accept your issue, civil rights, at first, but after a year or so, they will. And so I believe coalition talk, and that's what we did. We did that, and it's true, a couple of years, then the list of bills that the WELAC was going to take on for the legislature included the civil rights bill, and it did from then on. So I'm a huge believer in coalition politics, and the Dirigo Alliance, basically a progressive alliance of environmentalists, labor, civil rights, women. I think that's the way to go. And what I heard, and what we don't have time to address, is did gay and lesbian issues overshadow other issues? And for that, I want to say maybe, but I reserve the right to fight for myself. And so can they, and I help fight for them. But I don't feel guilty about it.
That's a good answer.
That was a good answer.
Yeah, that was a good answer.
You had to ask a really hard